Okay, so let's get going. So last week we really did just focus on getting through the basics, getting through the cards. It was a lot of information just kind of dumped. And unfortunately, in any kind of class, there's going to be information dumps, right? That's just kind of how it goes. But once we have that kind of down, the true, like I was saying, with Lenormand, you very rarely ever read a single card by itself. Now, there are exceptions to that, and which we'll talk about next week when we talk about the 9 card. So there are certain exceptions to that where you're kind of seeing, oh, that over there kind of tells me something. But for the most part, Lenormand is not meant to be read as a single card. So with a tarot card, you can pull a single card. You can have card of the day, pull a card, think about the energy of the card, and go with it. Same thing with Oracle. Now, there's not any saying that you can't do that with Lenormand. And the first thing I do want to talk about, yes, which is on here, I wanted to reiterate, kind of go back to this idea of different ways of reading, because my intention as a teacher is not to say this is the way that you shall read Lenormand and no other ways are the ways to do it, right? That's not my intention. My intention as a teacher is to say, these are the ways in which Lenormand is traditionally read. These are the ways in which I read Lenormand, and take that information and kind of work with yourself. Say, what resonates with you? So today we're going to actually be going over a couple different ways in which you can read Lenormand, and there's not a right or a wrong way to it. Now, there are traditions, and this is part of the problem when you're looking at any tarot, not any, because Oracle is fairly new, just the way we think of Oracle, like a Blue Angel Oracle deck. But if you look at, say, Gypsy Witch cards, Sibylla cards, Kipper cards, Lenormand cards, tarot cards, right? All of those things, starting with maybe tarot back in the 1400s, up to Lenormand in the late 1700s, Kipper was the late 1800s. They have traditions that are in place. But most important to understand is that even in those time periods, even in those places in which these came into being, these systems came into being, not every single person is going to read them exactly the same way. There often are family traditions in which family, great-great-grandmother read Lenormand, and this is the way that she read Lenormand, and it was passed down in the family, and this is how the family reads Lenormand. And that may be different from a person 20 miles away whose auntie taught them how to read Lenormand with some different nuances. So sometimes if you get into groups or online communities in which there are strict traditionalists, it can be really intimidating because they're like, this is the way to do it. This is the way it was done in this period of time in this place, and there's no other way to do it. I don't believe that that's ever the case. People, for as long as people have had things to pick up and do divination, people have been doing it. Whether it is sticks that they have picked up and cast, bones that they have picked up and cast, playing cards, as we saw last week with Lenormand, it was originally published as a game in which the cards made a game board with a little note saying, yeah, these might be fun to read as an oracle as well for entertainment, right? The purpose of it was not directly to be read for divination, yet we as people, as human beings, we love to answer questions. We have questions that we don't know the answers to, and we want to try to figure them out. And so we reach for what is around us. So there isn't anything sacred with the way that somebody read, divined with Lenormand in 1801 in Germany. There's nothing sacred about that that says you can never, there's no more conversation. So after 1790, when the first deck was created, to now 2018, there can be no changes and no growth and no continued conversation. That would be to cause something to go stagnant, and you probably wouldn't see it anymore. That happens with tarot as well. Tarot came from playing cards. The way that people read, we don't even know how they read exactly how somebody might use that to divine in the 1400s. So we can make suppositions, but we don't know. And so it's important to understand that, because I think that we can get, and there are groups of traditionalists who can get really locked into, you have to read it exactly this way, and if it's not exactly this way, you're doing something wrong. I don't personally subscribe to that, because I think that they are tools. So a deck of Lenormand cards is a tool for us to be able to tap into whatever it is that we tap into to get answers to whatever questions that we might have questions about. And so it is a tool for us. And how we choose to use that tool and how that tool works for us isn't going to be wrong. Now, I have a little caveat to that, because I think that one of the only things that I will say is the wrong way to do something is to not have any system whatsoever. Because if you take the bouquet, okay, and the bouquet means happiness and good things and wonderful things coming to you, good luck, good happiness, and it's somebody's sending it to you, it's coming to you. So that's, we know that's kind of the traditional meaning. And so you start to read Lenormand and you say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's a bouquet, it's flowers, people are excited when they get flowers, somebody sends flowers, that meaning makes sense. And so then you have a reading that says, should I break up with my boyfriend? And you just, where you shouldn't draw one card, but we're just for the sake of this conversation, you draw one card and you read the bouquet and you say, yep, I should break up with my boyfriend. Oh, okay. Because you want to break up with your boyfriend. Let's just say you're over, the relationship's done in your head, and you're done. You pull this card and you say, yep, I need to break up with my boyfriend. Because flowers come, they're cut off, they wilt, they die, they're cut away from the earth, and flowers are horrible. I hate flowers, so I'm gonna break up with my boyfriend, right? So if you're constantly changing the meaning of a card in order to fit what you want it to say, you're not going to get clear readings, right? And so it is important to decide, what does the flower card mean to you? What does the clouds card mean to you? And apply that consistently. And how you choose to read, which we're going to talk about in a minute when I stop babbling, but I am the queen of babbling. But I just think it's important to know that you don't have to get tied down to structure, to strict structure, and say, I can only do it this way, and if I deviate in any way, I'm doing it wrong. But I don't agree with that. But I do think it's important for you to know what is your system and apply that system consistently. And that's where you're going to start to get really clear meanings. So I hope that made some degree of sense. So I just wanted to touch back on this idea of traditional reading. Is that idea of, this is how, as close as we can tell, this is how they read Lenormand in 1820 or whatever time period somebody wants to go to, right? And say, this is the way it was read, these are the rules, right? And so I have to follow these rules, and I choose to follow these rules. I like these rules, they resonate with me, I'm going to read traditional, right? So you have that. Now the problem with that is what is the traditional reading? If it's because you found out somebody's great-great-grandmother read it this way, somebody else's great-great-grandmother might have read it some way different, and that doesn't make the way they read it wrong. So tradition, it gets complicated. then, and Mary Greer has and I'll send with this video link, I'll send a link to this article because it's interesting, where she reads the same cards from a traditional standpoint, from a modern traditional. So a modern traditional says, I acknowledge that there is a tradition with these cards. And that's part of the reason that I like Lenormand, is because I like this system that has developed surrounding these cards, and I enjoy that. But I have a little wiggle. The converse is me, right? I'm a modern traditional. I like the system of Lenormand, but I am not imprisoned by the system of Lenormand, because I do listen to an intuitive hit. If two cards come up in answer to a question and it says that, whatever it says to me, I'm going to go with that, because that is, I believe, when I do a reading, I'm tapping into my subconscious, I'm tapping into the collective unconscious, where there's information that I know intuitively, and I'm going to listen to that. So it's that blend of, I know the structure of Lenormand, I love the structure of Lenormand, but I do have some wiggle room. I will bring it into the 2018, right? I'm going to bring it forward into my world and the way that I see the world. Then there are people who try to read Lenormand intuitively only. Now, again, that's their way of stating it. I believe every part of that, everybody reads with intuition. I was saying before class started that you don't do a reading without your intuition involved in some way. The way that you choose to read that particular answer to that particular question in that particular moment involves you having to make a leap of intuition. But what they're talking about is reading Lenormand more like a tarot card, where you would look at this particular card and you would say, okay, it's the book card. Well, you know, there's this lots of brown colors and it's probably a little bit boring, but you know, all of a sudden we have this thing over here and it's really sharp looking, and you're kind of really diving into the image, and you're talking about the way that the colors kind of go together and all that. This is much more of an oracle style. And so that, and doesn't even play at all in how you would traditionally read Lenormand. That is a way to read. And I'm not going to say that it's wrong, because I think that you can pick up any pack of cards and read it however you want. The problem will be in calling it a Lenormand reading. So let's say you're a professional reader, and you put in your shop that you're going to do a Lenormand reading, and you do that kind of a reading, then you're probably going to have some people like, oh, this is not Lenormand. So you're using the cards for your own purposes, which is perfectly legitimate, but it may not be reading Lenormand. So no right way, no wrong way, but just be clear, just be consistent about however you apply it. And I think that most people who are learning Lenormand today are falling into that modern traditional, where you want to know the structure. You should. I truly believe in all systems, tarot, whatever the system might be. And I read a lot of different systems. If you're reading I Ching, if you're reading runes, if you're reading oghams, whatever it is that you're reading, if there's a historical basis, you should take the time to learn it. It's important. There's a history there. And then how is it going to then go on and work for you, bringing it into 2018? I think that most people fall in that modern traditional, but key is consistency. Stop babbling, Kelly. So let's take a look at, excuse me, some ways in which we can read the cards, right? So traditionally, there is a case to be made that Lenormand can be, can somebody answer if you can you see my mouse when it wiggles? Let's see, it wiggles. It's a goofy song. Yes, okay, that's good to know. I thought I tested that, but I couldn't remember for sure. So there are, in traditional Lenormand, there's a case to be made for reading from left to right, as most European, Western people read traditionally from left to right. But there is a tradition in which you can read from right to left in Lenormand. Now, in two cards, well, we're going to see how it can make a difference, but it certainly makes a difference when you're starting to do line readings or stringing a line of stories. So knowing what feels comfortable to you, again, it's about that consistency. So if it makes sense to you to read from left to right, then by all means read from left to right. If it makes sense to you because of perhaps your language, whatever it may be, other systems that you use, if it makes sense for you to read from right to left, there is tradition for that. And again, we're not so concerned about tradition. We're concerned with consistency. And so that is something that you'll want to come to fairly quickly in your Lenormand studies. You'll want to kind of come to a consensus of how you're going to do that. Again, just so that you have consistent framework. I tend to read from right to left, and some of it has to do with directionality, which we are not going to get into today, but some of it is if you are going to follow the way the car, which is more of a Kipper thing. It's not that nobody ever does it in Lenormand, but traditionally it is more of a Kipper thing where you really follow. So this person is facing this way, so if the woman card is facing this direction, then you're going to always be going that direction. You know, you're going to move along the way that she's facing, versus taking the tableau, this to the right is the future, this to the left is the past. So there are different ways of doing that. So there's always exceptions to every rule. But for the most part, it is, okay, what makes sense to you in terms of reading? And so I would say just do what feels right, and again, apply it consistently. I tend to read from right to left. That's the way I read a book, and so that's the way I tend to read things other than geomancy, because that has a very strong system the other way. So again, there's always exceptions. So if we look at these, I'm going to be right now talking to you from right to left and showing you how that changes if you go in the other direction. So if we look at the sun card, let's pause. I get so excited. I get a little bit ahead of myself. Let's pause for a minute and look at the middle here, and then we'll get to actually reading it. So let's take the sun card and the child card, which is examples that I've used here. There are different ways for these cards to present themselves in readings, depending on the question. Everything is going to depend on the question, but it can be the literal object. So it could be the actual sun in the sky, or it could be an actual child. If that is relevant to the reading, that there's an actual child, it could be an actual child, right? But the sun can also mean growth. So this is sort of a metaphor where it's because obviously the sun itself isn't growing, right? But the sun does cause things to grow. It allows things to grow. The movement of the sun changes our seasons, and we have our growing seasons depending on where it's at. You can go into this idea that the sun causes growth. So we have this idea of sun as growth. It can also be a symbol for power, right? Across ages, the sun has been usually, again, there's all different traditions, but in general, the sun is seen as a masculine, powerful, Aries kind of energy. And so we can look at this as a word for power, or a symbol for power. A child traditionally can be that idea of new beginnings. It's that beginning. It's the nucleus of the cell. I know people see other things in my child card, but that literally what I did with that painting was there was a wash of paint, and I dropped a drop of a different color paint onto the wet paint, and it bloomed like that. It was that instant bloom. And so it's that initial spark. It's that beginning of something. The word child can also for us connotate innocence, right? That idea of something that is innocent. And so there are different ways to read all of the cards, whether we're taking it as a literal object, or if we're looking at its traditional symbols, or what could it be a metaphor for. So there's different ways to read it, and that's going to generally be decided upon by the question itself. in terms of structure then, so we have, if you look at the chart below that, and the handouts that you have, I try to keep everything that is on the slides on your handout so that you have that to be able to refer back to later. So this is on your handouts that you received. If you traditionally, Lenormand is seen as sentence structure, as almost like a language in which you can take the same card, the son and the child, and look at them as a noun, which again, truthfully, or in a subject or a focus of the sentence. Subject, I think, is a little bit better than noun, because noun, is a person, place, or thing, and it may be something like growth. So a person may have a question about growth, that they are feeling stuck and they need to grow. So it's what is the focus, right? So we can have the focus, somebody might have a focus of growth. It could be a verb, meaning something that you're doing, an action, and so it would be grow. And then you could have something, I see a missing eye over here. I apologize. I will have to fix that. But it can also be descriptive. So then it might be something sunny or something warm, right? So there's different ways to read each one of these cards, depending again on the question, which we'll get to. So we then have the child card. So this could actually be something new, a new baby. It could be a new job, but it's something that it could be new. It could mean, in terms of an action, it could be something that is beginning. And as a descriptive, it could be somebody that's naive. So if we had a woman and a child card, you could say this is a naive woman, right? So there is a way in which that could describe somebody or describe a situation. So when we look at these two cards, we can see, okay, the first card, traditionally, the first card is going to indicate what is the focus, what is the subject of this. And so we have the sun. So the subject of this, if we want to say this about growth, we can say, okay, here's the sun. The focus here is growth. Well, what kind of growth? The child tells us what kind of growth. It's new growth. So the first card is the focus. This is what we are focusing on. This is the subject. This is the main nugget here. And then the child card is modifying that and giving us more information. So we have growth plus the child of something new. We have new growth. I gave some other options. It could be power, but it's power that may be naive or innocent. The idea of naive power, that idea of there's a lot of power there, but you may not know exactly what to use with it because you're inexperienced. Child could also indicate something that's inexperienced. So you can have power that is new, you can have power that's inexperienced, which can be a little scary, right? If you have a lot of power, but you don't really know what to use with it. It could be the beginning of power. It can be starting to grow. But the main focus is on the sun card and growth or power or what, depending on the question. So the first card is the focus. The card that follows it modifies that and gives us more information about that. So if you flip it around, like we have on the next one, where we put child first, of course, I can't see anything because I have too many boxes here. So if you have the child first, the child becomes the focus. So we have that idea of something that is new being modified by the sun. So then here's some examples where it could be happy innocence, something that is powerfully naive, which can mean the same thing. Again, a lot of times it doesn't entirely change it, but it can. A growing child, a successful, because the sun can be about success. So something that's beginning, but it's a successful beginning. It's a great start. We're off to a good start. Now, no matter what, these two cards together, because they're positive cards, are going to, if you just look at it in general, you're going to say, okay, this is something good. We're not looking at anything really bad here yet because of these two cards. But if you really want to get into details about it, paying attention to that first card and understanding that the cards that follow it are modifying it, changing it, giving more information about it is really important, I think, in Lenormand. So I got you guys kind of stuck up here out of the way. All right. Let me move you guys around here. So, and I have a note here also that, and this is what we talked about, so I'm trying to repeat myself over and over, but while you may sit down and do that sort of, what did you used to call that, sentence diagramming that you used to do in school, you remember they used to have where you like literally had these like structures that you would do and you would break down the sentences. So while it's certainly at the beginning, you're going to kind of want to think, okay, sun is the focus. Sun could mean this, this, and this. Okay, now what does child tell me about this? And you kind of run through the structure. That's really good and that's important at the beginning. Good question, April. 1 second and I will answer that. There is also something to be said about that instant hit. So if you have a question, right, it says, I would like to start, I'm thinking about getting this new job and I want to know whether or not this is a good, I should take this. And I lay down these 2 cards, my instant hit is going to be, oh yeah, this is good, right? This is something good. We've got something new showing up. We have the sun showing up, which is growth. It lifts everything up. It's a powerful card. So my instant, without going through and having to figure all that out, my instant reaction is going to be, yeah, this is probably a good situation, right? And then you can go into, so like I do highly recommend, especially in smaller chunks of cards, allow that maybe to try to hit first. What is your initial reaction? And you have those worksheets where, so you can print multiple copies of those and kind of write your cards down and write some information about it, especially if you're new, so that you can start to build up sort of experiential knowledge on working with the cards. And I would recommend that you try to write that instant hit down first and then sit down and start to dissect it, because I think that can be really helpful in trying not to get so focused on the exact grammar of things that you're losing the message. So maybe see, okay, what's your first reaction without looking too closely, and then start to go in and look at things really in detail. So I would recommend that. But April had a good question, that is the first card. So the first card is whatever is the first card, depending on how you're reading, right? So if you are reading from right to left, the first card, or from left to right, the first card is the sun, and that's your focus. If you're reading from right to left, the first card is the child card in this scenario right here. So first card meaning whatever's first in the direction that you choose to read in. But why it's important to, now obviously in this, either way, it's kind of giving us similar meanings, and it's certainly positive either way that we read it. But that could be different depending on the cards, right? If you have a coffin card in there, what's ending, or is the ending being modified, can really change the meaning. And that's why it's important to choose a way to read and consistently apply it, because then you start to again get to where your brain can sort of pick and choose how you want the answer to be, versus kind of doing the, kind of following not having a muddy reading because you've got a system that you have in place consistently. So good question. Thank you, April. So now this gets us to, yes, well, I would, Bart. So Bart asked a question, if you read from right to left, would you place cards while drawing them from right to left? Now after I do the slides, we're gonna talk about drawing and laying cards down, because that would influence that answer a little bit, because for the most part, let's say I'm doing 5 cards, I don't just lay down 5 cards, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. So it doesn't influence me as much. But if you are just randomly pulling cards, so you're going to say, I'm going to pull 3 cards, you're shuffling the deck and you're laying 3 cards. If you read from right to left, I say, yeah, again, there's no right or wrong way, but I would personally say yes, because you want that first card. So that first card should go in that position, and then the second and the third. So if you are laying your cards from right to left, your first card would go down, and then your second and your third. If you're reading the other way, your first card would go down, then the second and the third. Or you could do the way that I read it, which we'll talk about it in a minute. So yeah, that's a good question. But my instinctual answer would be to say yes. But again, there's no right or wrong way. It's just that you do whatever you do consistently. So this brings us to an important thing, and that is the question. Now, I read a lot of different systems, and so I personally think that the question is always important. The question is what gives us context. How we read two cards can be very different, whether we're talking about love, or we're talking about work, or we're talking about personal development kinds of questions. How we read that is going to be influenced greatly by the question. So in any kind of reading, I think that having a clear question is important. In Lenormand, Kipper style playing cards, what I call cartomancy style readings, I think they are key. I don't think there is ever a time in which you just lay the cards down and don't have some kind of question, even if that question is, what do I need to know right now to do XYZ? Or what is it that I need to know to go into today? There needs to be a question, or there's not any answer. You just have random cards. And so having a clear question is extremely important, in my opinion, in Lenormand, because I think of many, if I take Lenormand or Oracle or Tarot, Lenormand is the most specific. Now, can you read the other system specific? Yes, but Lenormand is known for that sort of blunt, quick answer. I'm answering your question. If you don't have a clear question, you may not know what it's answering. If you have a rambling question that isn't really focused, the cards may answer your question, but you may not know what part it's answering, or you may not realize that, yeah, it's answered the question, you just weren't very clear about it. So having that really clear question is important. Now, some people will say it shouldn't be a yes and no question, or that's a whole nother ball game. I disagree, and I agree. I think that even with yes and no questions, definitely narrow it to the highest degree, right? There's not any wiggle room there. It's not telling you why. It's not telling you how you might change that. It's not telling you anything. It's just giving you a blunt answer. And so it's probably the least useful, unless that's really what you need, is just, I just need a yes and no, and then I might start to ask other questions after that. So it's not that you can't ever use it, but it's definitely the most locked in. And so I'm going to do yes and no's as sort of a separate kind of ways that you can approach yes and no questions, and the end of the class, where we do some of the extra things in the last class. So I do think that you can ask yes and no questions, and I do think it's a great, I use playing cards. I don't use Lenormand as much, but I use the playing cards for yes and no's, but it works really well. But you have to have a very clear understanding of what the cards mean to you, and you have to apply it rather brutally. I always use 3, Jasmine asked, how many cards do I use? I always use 3. Again, that's personal. If you get too much, it starts to get unclear. I don't think 2 is enough, because it's just 2. So because I come from playing card reading, you always lay 3 cards. And so for yes and no questions, I think it's best to pull 3 cards. You've got an odd number, so you can have 2 positive cards and 1 negative card, or 2 negative cards and 1 positive, or 3 positive cards. It gives you that a little bit of nuance, and it just, traditionally, that's how I've always done it. So I always pull 3. But I will have a direct, let's look at yes and no questions. So taking the yes and no's out, so that's why, oh shoot, there we go. I keep getting things in the way. So that's why I put a star at the end of, will I get the job I interview for? Will I find love? Am I? And you will get these questions. If you read professionally, people do. And it's not that I don't answer yes or no questions, because I do answer them. But I do like to expand that out to something more like, so how do you change that? If you really want to know if you're going to get the job, right? but maybe you don't feel comfortable with having a yes and no. Okay, what do I need to know in order to get the, adding what do I need to know is a great way of kind of expanding a too tight question. What do I need to know in order to improve my work situation? I don't like where I'm at work, but I need to improve it. So that allows agency. You can't change perhaps somebody else in the office with you, but what do you need to know so that you can improve this, right? What do I need to be aware of to go into the interview? Is there something that I need to be aware of before I walk into a situation? Where is the job leading, right? What is a potential outcome if I do change my job? Some of the way that you answer or create questions is going to determine off of your worldview as well, because I don't believe in a fixed future. And I always, I'm very clear about that with my clients. So I will say, I don't believe in a fixed future. I believe that our future is being changed constantly by the choices and decisions that we make, and the choices and decisions that people around us are making that does influence our lives. So while I do look at cards for what I call future casting, look to the future, it's like forecasting. You're seeing the potential outcome. That doesn't mean it's locked in. That can change, and that's why you would get a reading, is so that if you don't like the outcome, you can start to make different choices and decisions. So how you frame a question, though, is going to depend on your personal worldview. If you do believe in a fixed future, then you might ask questions such as, am I going to meet so-and-so, and if I'm going to meet my true love in a year, then you might ask that as a yes and no question, because you believe that you can see, in your worldview, that functions. If your worldview is like mine, where your future's not fixed, you want to get information to help you to be able to navigate a changing, fluid future. So, always leave room for that understanding that your questions may look different than my questions based on the way that you see the world and the way the world functions. Relationship questions, a lot of times people will add, these are kind of questions that I get a lot. So it's that, okay, what is the energy surround? So instead of, is my relationship good, which is a yes and no question that you could ask, it's like, what's going on around my relationship, or what do I need to know about my relationship currently? What do I need to do in order to put myself in the best position to find a new relationship, versus will I find love, which is a question. And I think that we should not negate that as a very powerful question. And it's not something as a reader that I take lightly. If somebody asking, will I find love, is not silly, is not, asking a ridiculous question. It's somebody who's longing for something. They want to connect to another human being. And that's a powerful question. But how can we make that so that we get some useful information would be more, how can I set myself up to be in the right position to find true love? What do I need to do to get myself in that position? These types of questions are more useful if you believe in a fluid future, to helping you gain information so that you can affect the outcome that you are looking for. Ken says, do we give direct answers such as you should do this or that, or more open-ended, like probably you can try doing this, it may help to improve? So that's a good question, Ken. That is a question that has to do with your reading style and your reading ethics, right? So ethics do come into how you're going to frame a question. So if somebody asks, you have to know, and this is actually a really good question for you to bring up, because I want to make sure to talk about that, because knowing your personal reading ethics, and again, this applies to if you're reading for other people. Obviously, if you're reading for yourself, that's a game changer. However, if you're reading for another person, you need to know, before you're reading for somebody else, you need to know where are your reading ethics. Do you read on health? If somebody asks you the question, I've not been feeling very well, is there something wrong? Is that a question that you will answer? Most people today, and that was a very powerful geomancy, a lot of different divination systems people use for health questions. There are very specific cards that mean these particular organs. You'll see that in books on Lenormand as well. And so most professional readers have a disclaimer that they do not read for health issues, for very logical reasons in which you could get sued. And so in some states, you can't even read unless you're doing it for entertainment. I do not read health questions because I'm not a doctor. Will I read about how can I deal with a system? A particular situation that I am in. So if somebody might come and say, I'm in the middle of a health crisis, I'm seeing my doctor, but I just need to know what I need to do to kind of function and deal with a situation, then that's something that I work with, but I'm not going to diagnose somebody because I'm not a doctor. In terms of telling somebody directly what they should and shouldn't do, that's an ethics question of how you as a reader determine. I prefer to give people as much information as possible so that they can make those decisions themselves. And I simply say that this reading is here to help give you information, to help give you pieces of the puzzle so that you can make the best decisions. But the decision always, the power always remains with the person. And when we do something really solidly, yes and no, you will not get this job, you've taken away agency from that particular, in my personal position, in my personal feelings, you're taking away that person's ability to affect change. And I do believe that you can affect change. So I might say, you know what, it's not looking really good. There's definitely some obstacles, there's some blockages to getting these jobs. What is it we can do if this is really a job that you want to go for and there are obstacles there? Let's look at the cards around it. Let's kind of try to figure out what are some strategies that you can do to improve your chances. So for me, the question should never shut somebody down, but give them information so that they can make better decisions. They can make the best decisions that they can make to get the outcome that they're looking for. Kristen asks if we shuffle again if the querent has further question on the same subject. We'll get into that later because it depends on the type of reading that you're doing. If you're doing a grand tableau, no, you would just kind of go to different parts on the table. So that I would personally answer the question that you have. If I have a reading on the table and something has come up and we thought, you know what, we need some more information, I personally tend to, because I have a lot of decks, so I personally tend to get another deck and reshuffle and leave that reading on the table and then reshuffle a different deck and ask more questions. But that's just me personally, because I want there to be the opportunity for any card to be able to come up. So I'm going to keep going. I'm going to try to leave room for questions. So if you have one that's maybe not directly related to this, make sure you write it down and so you can remember to ask when we're done. So I'm going to keep moving. But the key here is the question is important. Understanding your worldview is important. Understanding your ethics. Are you going to read if somebody asks you if they are pregnant? Are you going to read if somebody asks you about their health issues? Now, again, what you might do for yourself is very different, right? So what I might read for myself or my daughter or my sister, where I can literally know if they are going to go to the doctor and take care of the situation, may be very different. But if I'm reading for somebody that I don't know, you have to be careful because you don't know that person. What if they just take what your reading is as if you are a doctor and they don't do anything else about it? So there's lots of questions there. So that's kind of a separate question of a professional reader versus a person reading for your own self. So I'm not saying that you couldn't read a question for your own health if you know yourself enough to know, okay, I'm still going to go to the doctor. I'm still going to do the things that I need to do. So those are all things, though, that you need to sit with at any type of reading, whatever it is. If you're going into a reading, understanding your worldview. How do you see the world? How do you see cards working? How do you see the future? Do you see it as being fixed or do you see it as being flexible? How do you feel about health questions and non-health? How do you feel about relationship questions? Will you do a reading saying, how does this person feel about me, where you're invading somebody who hasn't asked for readings space, so to speak. How do you feel about third party reading? All of those kinds of things are things to work out for yourself, both for how you read for yourself and how you might read for somebody else. It's important to kind of have those things down, because that's going to affect how you frame your questions. And there's no reason that you can't. If your friend comes to you and says, I feel like things aren't quite right with my relationship. Can you do a reading and tell me what is my boyfriend thinking? So there's no reason that you can't say, I do not feel comfortable reading for that question because he hasn't requested a reading from me. Now, in my personal worldview, I don't even think that works clearly, because I believe a person needs to be receptive to me reading for them in order to open that connection. That's my personal worldview. So not only do I ethically not want to invade somebody's personal space that hasn't asked for a reading, but I also don't actually think that works very well. Doesn't mean that you can't get answers. It doesn't mean you can't get some information, but I don't think it's going to be as clear or as actionable as somebody who has, and that's my personal worldview. So I would say I'm not going to get a clear reading on that, and I don't feel that that's right. How about if we just look at the relationship and what you need to know about the relationship and how you might need to move forward, and kind of reframe things. There's no reason why you can't do that, and just be open and honest about how you see readings, and let's try to work this question so that it will give you the best information that you can get. So that's why it's important to know how you see the world, how you see readings work, and what it is you're willing to read on before you start to really go into this, because it helps you to frame your questions. And I think I'm rambling again. So we'll be talking about questions a lot as we start to do more readings and things. This will come back, but I think that it is important, because so let's just take this example real quick. Let's take this example. So here at the top, we have the path card and we have the fox card, right? So if this was a question, right? So if somebody came, let's take these three, work. These are kind of the three subjects people probably ask the most questions about: work, relationships, and then the type that are just more personal growth type questions. And so if somebody came and said, I'm getting ready to go on an interview for a job, is this a job that I should take, right? So that's a work question that comes up a lot. So here, let's take the first one where you have the path card, and then, or the crossroads is a path card, and then we have the fox card. So if I was to answer this question, first I'm looking at the crossroads. So that's for me, the crossroad card popping up is really important, because it does mean it's an important decision. This decision is going to take you one way or another. So with the crossroads, you no matter what, you have to make a choice, and it's usually a choice that you need to make right now. It's important. It's timing issue, and it is going to change. You've got to go right or left, and so you have to make that choice. So we say, okay, this is an important decision. You have a decision about this. You might actually be given it may be offered to you, but you yourself actually have a decision about whether this is good for you to take or not. And so then we have the fox card. So the fox is modifying that decision. So the answer is, in a nutshell, again, I don't ever just draw two cards, but we're just kind of trying to get a feel for this. So the answer, the main focus is, okay, this decision time here. You're going to reach a situation in which you've got to make a choice here. Now the fox is giving us some more information about that. So the fox card is, the way that I read the fox card is a warning card. It says, pay attention. It says, be smart about the situation. Be smart here. You really need to pay attention when the fox card comes up, and you need to think a little bit outside of the box. You need to be being clever here. You need to be being smart about the situation. And it can, experientially, the fox card for me often does recommend getting advice from somebody who might know the situation better. So in this particular situation, I would say, okay, this is an important decision. You're kind of at a crossroads where you're going to make this is going to make a difference in your life, which way you go. And so the fox card showing up says there's some warning here, and you need to pay attention. You need to read the fine print. You need to make sure that you're making a decision, having all the information that you need, and perhaps get some advice from somebody in the field. So if you're trying to get a job interview with in a commerce situation, is there somebody that you know that is in that same field that can kind of say, can weigh in on the discussion? So that would be a qualified, pay attention, look for some fine point and some details. You need to be smart about this. Yes, strategic decision is very good. We'll talk about timing, Jasmine, in another one, but a lot of, in terms of timing, crossroads can indicate that decision is fast approaching. Yes, but we'll talk about timing in a different video. So now, if we look at the same question with the fox as the first card that we see below. So right now we have, essentially, if you just look at these, I've got this, I'll come up with the same answer. So my same answer for either one of these way these cards are set, I'm going to come to the conclusion that pay attention, right? There's something you may not be seeing, get your head on a swivel, read the fine print. It's a bit of a warning. You've got to be smart about this, right? And it's more, but the fox being in the focus position puts more emphasis on that. Okay, this is a decision in which you need to be really smart. So both ways are kind of, in this particular instance, both ways, I'm going to come to the same conclusion, but there is a more emphasis on that. You better be smart about this. You better pay attention. You better read the fine print. If you're in the middle of a divorce, you better have your divorce lawyer look things over. If you're selling a house, you need to have a real estate agent read the contract. You need to pay attention here. So it kind of amps that up there. Now, the same thing might happen with a relationship. Okay, so let's take the first question on the relationship. What are the energies surrounding my relationship? Here we again have the crossroads card. Okay, the relationship's at a crossroads. You're at a place in your relationship where there's some decisions that have to be made before you move forward, right? And you need to be really smart about this. So there's some ways in which you may not be seeing things clearly. Is there, again, a way in which you need to start to think, what are some things you can think outside the box? So if it's a long-term relationship, it's time to shake things up a little bit, maybe do things a little bit differently, bring some new thing that you both enjoy to do into the relationship. How I might look at the fox could be different in a long-term relationship versus a work question, or even very different versus somebody who's in a new relationship. Is this a new, I always ask that with Grand Tableau. When somebody orders a Grand Tableau, is your work current work that you're looking for, or a job you're looking for? Are you in a current relationship, or is this a relationship in which is a long-term relationship, or is this a relationship you're looking for? Because that it differentiates how you're going to answer that question. If I'm in a brand, I've just met this guy and I kind of want to see what I need to do, the fox card may read very differently than I'm in a long-term committed relationship. Then, you know what, we need to think outside the box. We need to do things a little bit differently. But in all of those situations, the crossroads says we have reached a point in which a decision needs to be made. So same thing with the last section. If somebody, which I get this question a lot, I really feel stuck. I feel like I can't move forward and I need to move forward. And the decision card, the crossroad comes up, says, okay, it's time to make some decisions. You may just be like, I might do this, I might do that. I might be wanting, I kind of want to do this. You're kind of waffling around. The path card is going to say, it's time to set a clear path. You need to choose something and go for it. You need to be smart about it. It may be something a little bit outside of your comfort zone, that you need to try something a little bit differently. Don't keep fishing at the same river, go over to the hen house and steal a chicken. So it can have that connotation, but it does say, look, it's time to make a choice. It's time to stop waffling, choose your road, and start to go for it. And that's going to start to help move you out from being unstuck. So while the questions may have similar, because you still have the crossroads card and the fox, exactly how you read it is going to be different depending on the situation. So having that clear understanding of the question and the situation is really important. And as I talked about in the I think before everybody was on, there are, if you, let's say you have this question, I'm getting ready to do a job interview, and the path card and the fox card come up, and you're sitting there and you're saying, I don't even know what to do with this, right? It's just, you're blanking. So combination lists, which are often in Lenormand books, you can go to websites. I think it's Learn Lenormand. I will send a link to it. That's my favorite one of those, where they will list sort of, if these two cards are together, what are some possible meanings for that? That can be helpful when you get stuck and you're just looking at something and you're saying, what? You know, what? I don't know what to do with this. That can be helpful, but I really caution relying on those too much, because then it starts to, again, from the way that I see reading, it's more about what's coming up for you. What is the answer to that question based on you, based on how you see readings work. And the more academic that you go, I think you start to lock yourself out of that, and you just don't get a good read that way. But it is helpful. But I would recommend, versus instantly maybe going to those types of lists. And again, I think they're helpful. I have definitely used them when I first started reading Lenormand, because you kind of get to see, like, oh, I never even thought of those two combinations of what those could mean. So it is helpful, but don't let it be sort of your first go-to. First, kind of stop and say, okay, this is the path card. What does the path card mean? Okay, well, the path card is a crossroads. You got to make a choice which way you're going to go. You can kind of start to work through those meanings. Okay, so it's a path. It's a decision that I have to make. And now I've got the fox coming into modifying that. The fox is about being smart. It's a little bit of a warning card. So I need to make a careful decision. I need to really pay attention. I need to make a smart decision. I need to make a clever decision. You can just start to work your way through it by focusing in on that focus card, and then starting to add the extra information that you have for it, and try to kind of work your way that way first, and give that an opportunity before you instantly jump to maybe a list of things. So helpful, yes. And again, in the terms of practicing, and this is a big thing for me, I have no luck just pulling random cards without any question and just sort of practicing that way. I do think that questions, there's no answer. Somebody asked about a pendulum as yes and no. They work great for yes and no if you use a pendulum. But the same thing, if you don't have a question, that is not going to work correctly. And so I would at least have, even when you're practicing, have some sort of question, even if it's just, what do I need to know today? Should I go to, if you're going to try yes and no, have a question. Should I go to the store now, or should I wait until tomorrow? Like, whatever that may be, have some sort of question in play as you are pulling the cards, because otherwise you're just going to kind of get swamped by all these different potential things that it could be. And I don't think that's really useful, because you're never going to be pulling the cards outside of a question. So maybe sit down and say, I'm going to practice relationship questions. So, what do I need to be aware of in order to improve my relationship? And then just start pulling sets of cards and saying, okay, in relation to that question, this is how I see that answering. And I think that's much more useful, because you're never going to be doing a reading in which you don't have some sort of question in play, if that makes sense. So the question is important. So let's even look at what time I don't even know where my phone is. Are we horrible on time? You're like, oh yes, we are horrible. We're horrible on time. Okay, that's the bulk of it. So let's just go quickly through because you do have these in your handouts, but I do want to kind of look at the couple different patterns that you can choose to read. And so this is simply what we were just talking about. It's about modifying, where you have a focus card or a subject card, and the rest of the cards describe that. So keeping with the sun and the child, we start to build. So if we take the first one, whereas the sun is the main focus, so we're talking about a, let's just start with something. So we're going to say that this is about growth. Okay, so we're talking about the sun has come up and it's about growth. Okay, the child card modifies that. So now we have new growth. When you add in the next card, we have that new growth right there. So we've already determined we have new growth. And now the heart card is going to modify the new growth. So we have new growth, passionate new growth, right? So we have, that's how I would personally, if we're sticking with new growth and we add that in, it would be, okay, now we have passion involved, we have love involved. Now it could mean actually that if it's in a relationship, that this love, there's a new growth surrounding this love relationship, but we have now passionate new growth. We're just kind of modifying that as an extra adjective, right? And then, okay, now we have passionate new growth, but we've added in the clover card. So now we have lucky, lucky, that bit of luck and happiness. So we have lucky, passionate new growth. It just continues to build these adjectives to this subject. So we still keep the new growth, or the growth here, that key subject right there. We keep that as the main focus, and each subsequent card is modifying and giving us more information about that first card. So that is, and you can continue to grow that as far as you want to grow. If you have a grand tableau, it could go out 9 cards if you read it that way. But this pattern of reading, the next card keeps modifying the chunk of cards before. So this is a way to read, and I highly recommend. Lori, so is that why you read from left to right when you add more cards as opposed to other readers who may read? Well, you would do the same thing. So that would be the same if you, let's take this example that are right here. If the first card is, you're doing the exact same thing, you're just doing it in another direction. So your first card here and this would be the security of home, and then you're adding in the clover, and so you have this sort of a little bit of happiness in that secure home, and then you're adding the passion in, and then you're adding the child, and you're adding the sun in. So it's which way, the direction isn't really doing anything in terms of how you work the pattern. It's just what direction, what's the first card, and then you're just adding those things in. So how I read these 5 cards is going to be different. Oh yes, this example, as I said before, these examples are all reading from left to right. As you can see, if we go back here, oops, let me try to go back here. So here we have this sun card is the subject, it's the focus, and this next card is modifying that. Then these 2 cards together become the focus, and the next card qualifies that. So this example is reading from left to right, which is primarily how people that I know read. But again, it doesn't change anything, except for, it doesn't change the way the pattern works. It just changes what is your first card, right? So again, if we're looking at this 5 cards, I lay this 5 cards down. The focus is going to be the sun for me. Where if Lori, say, if she reads from right to left, the focus for her is going to be the house card. So that's very different focus, and that's why it's important for you, before you lay the cards down, to know which way you're reading, because what is going to be your focus is what's going to be important in this pattern. Now, doesn't mean that you have to read this pattern, because we're going to look at other patterns, but this is a traditional pattern of reading where you are building up by continuing to modify the first focus card, the subject card, the noun card, and you're continuing to modify it. Another very popular way of reading, which I do quite a bit, is in sets. So again, because in Lenormand, we don't read single cards in general. We're always reading in sets. You can take a line. This again works for a line reading. If you choose to read this pattern, should you always be consistent with this pattern? You know what, that's a good question, Kaylee. Some of that depends on what it is that you're laying down. So are you just laying down a line of 5? Or are you reading this in a grand tableau? We're going to talk about that more in the context of the grand tableau. Are you reading this in context to a 9 card? Depends on how you're reading. So if you're doing a line reading, which I don't do, I'm going to show you when we're done here, I'm going to show you quickly how I tend to read. But if you're just taking 5 cards and laying out, then yes, I think that you probably should have a fairly consistent way that you tend to read. I think you just naturally fall into that. You might try certain things out, and if you're completely new Lenormand, you can try these different. That's why on your sheet I kind of left a place for you to check, okay, this example I'm trying it out in this way, so that you can try them out and see whether or not what seems to resonate with you. But I think that in general we tend to fall into a pattern that works best for us, and then we apply that consistently. But sometimes it's depending on what is the reading. So for example, if I'm reading a grand tableau, that might be very different, and if I'm laying out a line of 5. Does a qualifier become a verb? Does a qualifier become a verb providing an action? Not in this, no. Let me go back. Not in this particular style of this pattern of reading. The next card is always just modifying it, so it can't not necessarily become a verb. That we'll get to when we're getting into more of a sentence structure in a minute. So in this one, your second card could probably be an action or a verb, but the rest of your cards are always just going to be modifying that and adding more information on in this particular pattern. In this particular pattern, you're kind of however long your line is, and I use this a lot at the end of a grand tableau. There's a thing that you can do, which we'll get to when we do a grand tableau, where you end up with a 9-card line. And so I use this format a lot, where you're kind of taking the first 2 cards and you're saying, okay, it's a new growth. Okay, so that's our there. We've got new growth, and then you're taking the next 2 cards. So taking child and heart. So we have new growth, and we have now we have something new that's passionate, a new passion, and we're looking at those 2 cards, and then we're looking at the next 2 cards, and we're just building this story by overlapping 2 + 2, and you can roll down the thing and just get more and more sentences to add on to your reading. And we're going to do some actual readings in a second, where I think that that's going to be more useful and helpful than this. But this is kind of just showing you how you can take these 2 cards, the sun and the child, figure out what they mean to you. Okay, it's new growth. Take the next 2 cards, child and the heart. So now we have something new and passionately new, that kind of thing going on here. Now we've got the heart and the clover, right? So we've got lucky love, we've got lucky passion, we've got happy passion, we've got good things going on here. Now we've got stable, so we've got clover and house. So now we have secure happiness, secure luck. This is going to go to a secure place. So we can read those by sets of 2 going off down the line. So that's a pattern that you can apply to a 5-card or however many cards you're going. This is a one that I think I probably use the most, and I think that a lot of people do with Lenormand, in which you are reading it as a sentence. You're kind of reading it sequentially. Now, I do not strictly read verbs and adjectives and participles and all of that kind of thing. For me, it's a lot more of a story, but this is where you're reading, you're building this, you're reading a story. So here we have the sun card, right? So we have this power and it's something new, and we have passions involved and good things that are coming, and it's all wrapping up with this ending of security and stability. And so you're just kind of building this story going across in a line. Now you could get very, okay, well, here we have the sun, and the sun is the subject. And so we have, reading these two together, we can see this new power, this new beginning, this new growth is something that we're really, again, it has to do with the question. So I'm going to not go into too much detail until we switch down in 1 second. And I'm going to answer the same question using the different ways of doing it. And I think you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. But you can just build a story starting from the beginning and going to the end with a line like the same line. And then the final one is, in which I'm going to show you in just a minute. So we're going to end this right here, where you actually find, not end this, but we're going to go down to where you can see my hands, so we can actually do some reading so you can see what I'm talking about. So, but this is where you are pulling for a significator card, and you're pulling the cards on either side of the cards, either one card on either side or two cards on either side, and then you're reading it in sets of 2. But I'm going to show you that in video format because I think it's easier than being able to do it right here. So again, this is kind of information dump you have in your handouts. These are different patterns of ways in which you can read, so that you can try them out. But let's switch down to where you can actually see my hands, and we can actually do a couple questions and see how that might work in a situation where you can see me. So I'm going to try to do this smoothly, but let's see how so if you need to step away to go to the bathroom or anything of that nature, feel free to do so. I'm gonna now stop sharing like this. Oh, I think I have accomplished not sharing. Let me take a drink. I'm going to take my hands off hold, and then I'm going to spotlight my hands. So you should all be seeing my desk at this moment. If that's, yes, I see April nodding. So you should be seeing my desk. And remove stuff. I wanted to talk about that in a minute, but we'll talk about that over there. So this is going to be a little bit wonky. I couldn't get the tripod directly in front of me without obviously not being able to reach the table. So I do apologize for that, as well as it's not perfect video quality, but I think this is going to be a little more useful. You know what I think would be helpful here is bigger cards. Let me, hold on one moment. Let me get a deck I have that's larger cards, because I think that's going to help you be able to see. I do not like Lenormand decks that are large, but in this situation, I think it might be helpful. This is the Gilded Reverie Lenormand by Chiro Marchetti. They're larger than a poker size cards, which makes it impossible to do a grand tableau for me, but in this situation, I think it will be helpful. So let's do what we were talking about here. So does somebody have a question that they just want to throw into the pot here, and we will kind of apply this. You can try getting a smaller tripod that can stand in just in front of you. I do have them, but no matter what, if it's in front of you, you have to work around it, and I'm really crappy at it. So we'll play with this and see how it will work, at least so that you can see something. I have had it over at that side, but then everything is upside down which I can do and fix in post-production, but not with y'all sitting right here. So for today, we'll just try to make this one particularly work. So nobody's gonna, can I move to the south this year? Okay, so that's a yes and no question, Roseanne. So we're gonna, for the sake of this, we're going to shift that a little bit about, okay, what might you need to know about moving to the south this year? Because again, we'll talk yes and no. I do yes and no's, and they're great, but we're going to put that in another subject. So here we're going to start with this one, and then we'll kind of move through and give some examples. So Roseanne's asking the question of what she needs to know about moving to the south. Now, I'm going to first show you how I read. So this is the way that I personally read. I don't ever just lay cards down on the table without any context, and here's why. Lenormand is a reading that is built on proximity. What is close to or touching other cards is really important. And we're going to see this more in the 9 card next week. Again, we're kind of building, and I know that as you're building, you kind of feel like you just have little pieces of the puzzle and it's not all coming together. That's because we've got to kind of build up as we go, step by step. But Lenormand is a system of proximity. If you have all 36 cards on the table, all 36 cards can't be saying something to you all the time, or you know, it's just, you have a crazy life if that's the case, right? So what is close to your card, your significator card? What is close to, if you're looking at a job, the job card? We're going to go through the significators next week more focused. But what is close to the heart card, if you're looking at love, that becomes important. What is close to the house card, if you're going to plan on moving house, those are the cards that are in play and affecting the situation. So that's really a key component of Lenormand. And because of that, I don't personally like to just lay 5 cards down on the table, because I want the cards that are in play around the subject that I'm looking for. So the way that I lay 5, I never lay 5 cards. And it doesn't mean you can't. We're going to do that too. But I want to show you how I read, and then we'll build from there. I don't ever just lay 5 cards out randomly on the table. It's just not how I read. So I'm going to pull for Roseanne here. We're going to look to, now this one is different, right? So we could do, if she's selling her house, we're going to save that for Corinne. But with Roseanne, she's talking about moving. She wants to move and shift. So I'm going to look to the stork card. The stork card is about literally moving. It's transitioning into another place. It has to do with movement. If she was literally, do I buy a house? Then I would look to the house card. So for Miss Corinne, I'm going to shuffle, shuffle, shuffle until I'm done, and then I'm going to turn the cards over to where they are facing me or the client. So then I'm going to literally go through the cards and find the stork card. And generally, I pass it up, and I always know the person I'm reading for is saying, "You passed it, you passed it." Of course, it's going to be I must have passed it. See, this is why I don't use this. There it is, right at the beginning. So in this case, I'm going to take, because we're doing 5 cards. So I find the card, this is the stork card, and I'm going to take the 2 cards after it and the 2 cards before it. And I'm going to lay those out. And that's how I would personally read a 5 card like that. And so here is the focus card, and I'm going to look at these 2 cards before it and these 2 cards after it. We have the house card over here, which is good in terms of moving. That to have that house card shows up, it's like, okay, that's good. We have the key card, which is the success card. So we have a successful home, we have a successful house. This, just looking at this instinctually, this is good, right? We've got the key card, which is success, putting the right key in the right lock, and we say, okay, and then we're talking about a house. So this would be a successful move. Things are looking good here. Then we look over here at these 2 cards, right? And so here we have another movement card. We have the ship card. We also have the birds card, which says that so we're looking here and we're saying, okay, well, she's probably got some anxiety about the move. She's clearly. I mean, sometimes Lenormand can be very blunt, or be very, yeah, we know that, right? Obviously, if she's asking the question, she's not sure about it. And so you're like, okay, yeah, she's obviously not real sure about it. She's unclear. She's a little bit nervous. Her brain might be in overload going, oh, should I do this? Should I not do this? You know, you can kind of get that feeling of there's a lot going on in the head. And so she's got some concerns. The journey, the path, this movement is concerning to her and causing her some degree of anxiety. So the way that I would personally answer this question is, you're a little bit stressed about it. You know, obviously there's some concerns that you have about it, but overall this looks like this is something that could work really well for you. And so you might want to, yeah, so she's saying it could, there's some, it's not, you know, it's not always easy just to pick up and move. So this is saying there's some concerns here, but it looks like in general things are going to go well for this situation. So that's how I would personally read that. But let's do the same. So I'm going to answer the same question in a line, because that's how I read, right? So I always read with the significator card out. I never lay anything down without the significator. But that's not how you have to read. So I'm going to answer the same question. Although no, I'm not going to answer the same question because that never works. Never repeat the same question with Lenormand because it will not answer you correctly. So I'm going to go on to the next question, but read it in a different way. Do you personally read the first and last cards as a pair too? You can, yes, Christine, yes. But right now we're going to kind of stay basic. So what she's asking is, let's say you have these, could you then start to, if you read these two and these two, then you could also start to pair these two, and you can pair these two. There's a lot that you can do to start to bring in more information. I don't tend to do that with some, usually if I'm laying cards like this with just 5 cards, because really you're looking at 4 cards, I'm not going for in-depth information. I'm just trying to answer a question. If I'm trying to do get more information, then I'm almost always laying a 9 card. So personally, I almost always lay either a grand tableau or a 9 card down, which we're going to talk about next week. But these types of things that we're doing here help you to read a grand tableau, because in a grand tableau you can look for the stork card and say, okay, what are the 2 cards before it, what are the 2 cards after, what is 1 card before, what is, you can start to apply these to a grand tableau. But so the answer of your question is, generally with a small reading like this, I'm just using it to get a quick answer, and I'm not going to start playing too much with it, because then the best thing to do is a 9 card. I mean, the 9 card is the sort of key to the whole grand tableau, is reading a 9 card. But that's for next week, so we're not going to get there. So I'm going to do the next question in a line instead of the way that I just did it. So let me roll back up here. Jasmine said she would like to know if the management will involve me with the hiring of new colleagues. So that's a yes and no question. So we're going to modify that again, because we're not working with yes and no questions. Again, you could change this to what do I need to know about whether or not I'm going to get hired, or I'm going to be involved with this. That type of, that's a harder one. You need to, I guess, if it's not yes and no, do you have more of a specific question that you might have? Well, let's just do it as, what is the energy surrounding this whole hiring of new colleagues, perhaps? Because, and see how you can see how hard it is to not ask yes and no questions. People go straight to those yes and no's. But let's just do it that way. What's going on around this process of Jasmine being involved with hiring new colleagues? So in this case, we're going to lay 5 cards out in a row. I'm going to be laying from left to right because that's how I read. It's not any different in how you read. It's just what's your first one. So if you go the other way, you're still reading the same way. You're just reading the cards in a different order. So it all applies here. Now, I do not, this is another question people ask, I don't cut Lenormand cards. So in a tarot deck, I might shuffle and then I cut the deck and I lay. In Lenormand, I never do that, simply because generally I'm always laying the way that I just showed you, where I'm looking for a significator, or I'm laying a grand tableau. So even in 9 card, I'm doing it the way that I just did. I never cut a Lenormand deck. But that is, again, what works for you. It's your own reading style. So I just, with Lenormand or anything, even playing cards, anything like that, I shuffle until it's done, and then I just lay from the top. But it's all, that's personal preference. So now we're going to lay 5 cards out. Now, let's just look at this in first. Let's take our first hit, right? I know this is probably not ideal, but we're just gonna make it work. So my first hit is, I don't see anything negative here, right? So they're pretty much all positive cards here. We've got lilies here, we've got starks, we've got moving transition, we've got the tower card, which can relate to corporate kinds of things. And so this in general, without going in and starting to then pick it apart, I can look at this and say, in general, things look to be, this isn't anything maybe underlying that she doesn't need to be aware of. There may not be any like bad intentions going on under the surface of things, because everything here is actually pretty positive. So if I were to read this as a yes and no, trying to find her original, there we go. If I were to answer her question as a yes and no with these cards, I would probably say the likelihood is strong, because we've got all positive cards here. We really don't have anything here that's negative to make me think otherwise. So in general, that's what I would do. So in the first way that we were reading, we would take the very first card as the focus. Now, the focus card of the tower means it's a stepping back. It's an isolation. So then I might, so this is why you can say, okay, now we're getting a little more detail. Given her question about whether she's going to be involved, then it starts to get a little bit rocky, and you say, I'm not, this could change, because this is a stepping away, it's an isolation, it's kind of getting up and above the situation, but it's definitely a pullback card. So I would start to say, I'm not entirely sure how involved you may be but we got to keep moving. Don't ever because we don't read one card, so we can't just stop there. So what's modifying that is the stork card. The stork card is positive change and positive movement, right? So we have a positive change around this, the tower card. Now the tower card can also be a perspective. Get up and above so that you can gain perspective. So when we add the stork card in, we can say, okay, actually, they may be pulling her in to use it because she's got a different perspective on the situation. She may have a better perspective on, I would say too, if it was the colleagues or if it was management asking me the question, I would say they should involve her, because she probably has a good perspective on the situation that she can offer. But in terms of from Jasmine's, I would still say that. I would say, okay, she looks like she's got a fresh perspective, and the movement is towards a positive situation. So I say that right now she's probably isolated from the situation, but she could actually, there could be a shift or a change in that. And so then we have, all right, how are we going to read those two cards together? We have a change from that isolation. So we can see energy that's shifting. And then we have the house card, which is going to modify those two cards. So if we have a isolation that's changing, or a changed sense of isolation, which to me would mean being pulled into that, now we have the house card that we're going to modify that and say that's going to stabilize, that's going to be secure. That's actually, the house is about security, stability, structure. And so that being made, so it's like, okay, we're going to stabilize you being brought in. We've got happiness here, modifying that, luck, happiness, but it's the clover card, which means she has to be paying attention to opportunities for her to maybe get that position, because the Clover card is about luck and happiness that comes when you're paying attention, because you're going to miss the opportunity if you're not paying attention to that. So I would say, okay, it looks like the opportunity to get involved is going to be there, and it could be a secure opportunity to get involved, but she's going to have to pay attention where there may be something that happens where it gives her an opening or an opportunity to getting there. And we have that in there. And then we take that whole pile and modify it by the Lily card, which is about balance and harmony. It's generally a positive card. So the likelihood that right now Hershey's isolated and not part of the process, the likelihood that she will be brought into the process is, in my opinion, is high, but she is going to have to pay attention to an opening. There is something that she's going to have to be aware of, so she can take that opportunity to make it so. So that's how I would answer her question based on those 5 cards. And I know there's probably, I'm not sure if this is, yes. So this one we're modifying. Yeah. What do I do? I'll get to that, Claudia, in a minute. So that one is modifying. So now I'm going to answer the next question. I'm trying to find it. So Corrine is selling her house and she wants to know what's helpful to know. So now I'm going to lay 5 out, but read them in pairs. These start to overlap. Like, I really wouldn't stress overly about, and I know that's hard to say because obviously when it's new, it's very stressful, right? But remember that the end goal is to get an answer, right? So the end goal is to get an answer and is to get consistent answers that are helpful to you. If you get overly stressed on exactly, how to do it, as long as you get your answer, that's what matters. And you'll start to get a feel for, okay, this, that makes sense to me. That makes sense how we're connecting these 2 cards. That makes sense to build a story. That makes sense to do. They all kind of overlap. It's just finding what makes sense. These cards are bigger. I don't use these a lot because they're bigger. So now Corrine, no, is it Corrine? Yeah, Corrine is selling her house and she wants to know what does she need to know about that situation? Okay, so now I'm going to lay 5 cards out. Okay, I think you can see this. Okay, so now we're going to read in sets of pairs, and kind of move along the way. Again, I think you still will get, for between the modifying and this pair set, you're going to get fairly similar answers, in my opinion. What's going to really change, I think, is more when you're picking the middle card there, which I think you still get fairly similar. It's just what is a pattern that works for you. So here we have the Rider card. The Rider card is about news that is coming. So she's going to have some news coming about this house. It's generally good news unless there's something negative around it. And we do have the Cross card next. So the Cross card is a burden. It's a weight. It's not the clouds, which is over here, which can bring everything down, but it is a negative card. And so this does indicate that there's probably a message or there is some information that she's going to be gaining about selling the house that may not be overly positive here. And again, another thing is to, especially in this kind of question, timing is going to come into play, right? Maybe this isn't exactly the right time to do something. So you can sometimes like, okay, I want to sell my house in 6 months, but we're going to talk about timing later. So I'm jumping ahead. So we can see here that there is going to be a piece of information coming to her that may not be positive. It doesn't mean anything bad's happening because we haven't asked, is she going to sell the house? It's that she's going to gain some information about selling the house that may not be super positive. It may kind of put a little bit of a damper on selling the house. What could that be? I'm not talking about Corey now. I'm just giving like random examples where maybe she has to have an inspection done and she's waiting for that to come back, and there may be something there that needs to be fixed. A real estate agent might be going to come through the house and say you need to, paint the inside of your house before you can do it. So there's a piece of information that is going to be coming that is going to put a damper on things. It may mean she's got to do something before she's able to do that, if that makes sense. Because a rider is not anything horrible, or it's not a no way. It's just information that's coming to you that's going to be put a damper on things. So we have that here. Now we can take, okay, so now we're going to take the next two cards. So we've got this, whatever this damper that's going on around here, but we have it being modified by the Clover card, which is a little bit of luck and happiness. So perhaps whenever she takes care of whatever that situation is, that's going to start to lift that up. So it could be something as simple as you've got to paint your front door. It looks really crappy. It's not going to, and I'm not saying this about your door, Corey, I'm just giving examples, but it can be something like that where you're like, okay, it's something that you can take care of. It's a little, the Clover's little luck, little thing. So we've got a burden here, but it's being modified by a little thing. And so you can say, okay, it's not anything major here. It's just something that has to be taken care of before you're going to be able to sell the house. So we have that here. We do have, though, the clouds showing up, right? So the clouds are the bigger damper. So now when we move on to the next two cards, we have that little bit of happiness, that little bit of luck that might be coming your way being squelched by a cloud over here. But the ending card is the stars card, and the stars card is you're moving towards your destiny. So if I was reading this set of cards for Corrine, I would say, there may be some things that you need to do to the house. You might need to fix up the house. You may be getting something on an inspection that's not going to quite make it. Or if you had a real estate agent come through, they might say there's some changes that you need to make in order to make this more viable. But you are moving in the right direction because of the stars card here. And so despite the cloudiness, despite that there may be some things that need to be done, or it may not happen immediately, you are moving in the right direction, and you should be successful at that. You should make your way, be able to navigate your way through selling the house. That's how I would read these particular cards. Okay, so that would be pulling it in that way. So then the last way of 5 cards is to just read it in a line. So let me see. Ken has given us some questions here. I'll come back to that one. Okay, I don't think we have another question, so we'll have to come up with a question here. Whoops. So we need one more question. Well, we can use, let's just use, we're going to use Ken's question. You definitely decide the technique before you lay the cards. Well, in my opinion, as with anything in terms of reading, you need to set your intention before you go into the reading, because otherwise you're again allowing your brain wiggle room to say what you want it to say versus what it has to say. So I always believe that when you're setting intentions for cards, like what is the significator? So if I have somebody ask me gives me a question about, should I go to college, or should I? I'm thinking about going to college this semester. How would that work out for me? So then I set my intention, because technically, okay, you could use the Tower card to represent an institution like college. I tend to use the book. It's learning, so I use the book. So I'm setting the intention that I'm using the book. I don't have to choose a way to read because I always read the same way. And so I go into the reading setting the intention of any significators that are in play and how I'm going to read, because otherwise you'll lay the cards down. You're like, your brain, you might not know it, but your brain might say, you know what, this is going to work out better in my self-interest if I read it left to right this time instead of right to left. And then you kind of start to muddy the waters of the reading. And so that starts to get confusing. Again, it's not that you're going to literally say to yourself that, but your brain does all kinds of stuff. And you might say, okay, I like the looks of this way, I'm going this way. So I say set your intention for the techniques or the significators before you read. So I'm going to, Ken is going to renovate his place and wants to know how it's going to be. We'll look at your cards in a second, but I just want to be able to show how we might answer this. Now we're just going to read it in a line. I'm not going to worry about sets of pairs. We're just going to just kind of read through like you're building a story. It's like you're writing a storyboard. So we're going to lay 5 cards out again. Okay. So here we've got 5 cards out, and I'm not going to worry about pairing them up. I'm really just going to read this in a row. So we can see the whip card. The whip card is about repetition. So it's a 10, if you're sweeping with a broom, you're sitting there and you're repeatedly sweeping. If you're whipping someone, unfortunately, it's repeated motion, right? And so on its very base core, the whip card is about repetitive motion. So this might be a job that is quite repetitive. It's going to take, it's going to get monotonous. It's going to be that sort of that. It can also mean a negative cycle. So it can be a pattern that you need, it's not really being helpful, that you need to break. So if somebody is, let's say, continually getting plastic surgery and they've kind of stuck in this repetitive cycle of doing, it's not good for them anymore. They need to break the pattern. It's that idea. So it can be a negative thing for them. But it can be on its whole just that sense of repetition and maybe a lot of work to do. It may start to get really monotonous for you. We do have the heart card, meaning this is something that he's passionate about. This is something that he's excited about. He would like to have his house to be renovated, and that's a good thing. But the fox card is telling us you better be smart about it. This may not be the best decision. How he's thinking of doing it may not be the best. He may need to think about a little bit of a different way of managing this. He may need to be smart about it because we can see the clouds here, and we also have the scythe card at the end where this needs to kind of come to an end in order to harvest something in. So in general, so you look at that and you say, okay, what does that have to do, right? Because sometimes I'll even look at these cards and I'll say, okay, what is this really telling us? So I skipped the step of saying, what do I see in general? So if you get to the end of a reading and you're like, okay, what is that really telling this guy who just wants to renovate his house? Step back and say to yourself, in general, what am I seeing? So in general, I'm seeing the whip card, I'm seeing the cloud card, and I'm seeing the scythe card. I'm also seeing the fox card, which is telling me there's a bit of a warning going on. There's a little bit of, you might need to be smart about this, right? And that's right in the middle of the reading. So in general, I'm saying, okay, there could be some problems here. So he wants to renovate the house. He might be getting into this project and it may turn into this sort of ongoing thing that gets a little bit overwhelming here. However, he's truly passionate about it. And it's maybe a way around it, but he's going to have to be smart about it. So if you look at a set of cards and you think, what does this have to say to this question? Don't panic or throw the set of cards out and just shuffle a new set of cards. These cards have something. I am the type of reader that believes that every single set of cards on the table has something to say. It may not say exactly what you want it to say, but there is a message there. And so the message for me is to step back and say, okay, individually, this is kind of a strange like storyline about renovating a house. So when I step back and I see there's quite a few negative cards, and I'm keeping my eye on this whip card here, and I'm saying, you know what, this could turn into being more of a project than he was bargaining for. This could go on longer than he's bargaining it to go on, and there could definitely be some difficulties. But with the scythe at the end, which is like Jasmine just asked, we know that he's going to gain something from it. So the harvest means the scythe card is something that is difficult and sometimes painful, but you're gonna get something out of it. There is a harvest. You use a scythe to cut down wheat and bring the wheat in. So he may be going into something more than he bargained for, but in the end, it's gonna pay off. He is gonna gain something about it, and he just needs to be pretty smart about it. Keep his eye on the bottom line. He needs to think about sort of try to, because what do I believe about readings? I don't believe it's set in stone that he's going to have a ton of problems, but I believe that the potential is there. And so now that he knows that, he can go into the project saying, you know what, I need to make sure that I've got my ducks in a row. I need to make sure that I sort of have, if I'm hiring contractors, that I have a beginning and an end to this situation. I need to be smart about it. So it doesn't mean don't do it. It means be aware that this could go on longer than necessary. It could be more problematic than necessary. So now you have that information to go make a tight grip on the how you go forward with it. Because I don't read for this is what's going to happen and then there's no way out of it. I read for what can help me as I'm moving into a project. So that intention is really important. And Ken says he probably has more ideas than what he can pay for. So then he might need to modify what his plans are and say, this could be a lot more than I can actually handle. So how can I reduce that down then and just do the things that I need to do and make it less of a problem? So I think that that's really important to keep in your head as you're reading, is what is your purpose? Is your purpose to just read the future and know what's going to happen? Or is your purpose to help yourself or your client be able to gain some information so that they can make decisions on how to move forward? And so that's important. So those are kind of in action how you might take those different ways of doing things and be able to modify or be able to get your answers and how that might look. And nothing says you can't use all of them, but as Jasmine was asking, I think you need to know going in, how are you going to read it? And I would suggest over the next week to try each one of those ways. You've got the handout, and again, please use the forum. If you're in the forum and you have a question, you've laid some card. We have a section for readings. Now that we're getting into this part of it, we have a section in the forum for reading. So if you've pulled a reading and you're like, I don't know what to do with this, take a picture of it. Make sure that you do the work, right? So make sure that you, what is the question? Obviously if it's something it's personal, then don't put it in the forum. But if you're willing to share it, what is the question? Take a picture of the cards. What is it you're getting out of it? Because it's not a place just to try to get somebody to answer your question. What is it that you've seen in the cards? And then ask for input. And I'm going to be definitely watching those. Also, nobody has to do any homework in this class. You can get what you want out of it. But this is an opportunity for you to, I would give yourself a couple days, do a couple readings, and then pick a reading that you've done, again, that you want my personal feedback, and email a picture of that, and or just list the cards out for me that you did in the order that you did it and how you read that reading. And then I will give you personal feedback on how, what I see in terms of how you read it, how I might read it, just to give you different opportunities. These are smaller readings, so it's like, the end of the world, but I think it helps to be able to get a little bit of personal feedback onto where you're going with things if you're stuck with one. So make sure that you take advantage of that. That's part of the reason. Yes, you can do a video, however you want to picture, write it out, take a video, send me a link, however you want to do that. But feel free to do that once this week. I think that that will be helpful for you. And you might as well take advantage of that opportunity. Again, it's not required. You're not required to do anything, but it's an opportunity for you to get kind of one-on-one feedback as we go. And that's going to be in the next couple weeks. That's going to be the same each week. So next week will be 9 cards, and so you have opportunity to send me a 9 card that you did, so we can have some one-on-one discussion about how you might read that. And then even when we get to the grand tableau, and that's kind of part of what you paid for. So make use of that. Different questions and different techniques. I would just pick one. It's just pick one that you perhaps are stuck with, or maybe the one that you feel like I nailed this, but you want to get another perspective. Whichever one, however you want to pick that is up to you. But it's just that opportunity to pick one. That's why I'm saying I probably wouldn't maybe do your very first one, maybe do a few so that you know whether, oh shoot, like I'm really stuck on this one. But definitely I would try to get those in to me, no later than Wednesday. That way you've gotten the feedback back before the next class. So again, make use of the forums, because other people they may not be teachers, but we all have different eyes. And so make use of that. If it's something you want to share in a reading, make sure that you make a attempt at reading it yourself first, so that then people can put other input. Make sure that if you are responding to somebody's cards, that you do so in a polite manner, in a way that its intention of the forums is to be helpful, and anything else negative like that would be will be deleted. So, but make use of that. Each other being a support and different eyes for each other is part of the benefits of doing a live class in which there are people that are all together in a classroom. So you can make use of that as well. And any questions that you might have, I'm putting the videos up in the video section of the forum. So if you have a specific question about that class, leave a question there. I will be checking those. It may not be immediately, but I will be checking those, so that if you have specific questions on this class, you can leave that question there, and that way we can address that. Roseanne, I will send kind of a repeat when I send the link to this class. I will kind of repeat how you the information of getting into the forum, in case that's something. It's not Facebook, which I know makes it slightly complicated, but not everybody uses Facebook, so that's why we're doing it this way. So I will kind of repeat the links and the password on how to get into the forum, so that you can make use of that. And then my email, you can just reply. I'll be sending you a link to this class. So it's thetruethandstory@gmail.com. You can just reply to that in order to send me your reading that you want to have personal feedback on.